The church door of Nethercombe gave under her shoulder exactly as it had given every Sunday of her girlhood, and the first thing that met Miss Honoria Fell, salt-stained, travel-worn, 25, and alive, was the sound of her own name being spoken aloud from the lectern. Honoria Fell, said the voice, was the truest soul this parish ever failed to notice. The noon light of high summer stood in the church like something poured, coming through the tall, clear windows in wide shafts and gathering, all of it, on a small table before the chancel, where white lilies and dark rosemary had been banked about a portrait on a stand. It was the likeness of a young woman with steady gray eyes and plainly dressed brown hair. Painted at 19 and never painted again, and Honoria knew the face at once, because it was her own. Every pew was full, 200 backs in mourning black, still as a field before rain. And at the lectern, where old Mr. Beach the rector ought to have stood, there stood instead a tall man in a black coat and white cravat, his fair hair pushed back rough, as if he had ridden hard and not cared, his eyes down on the pages in his hands. She knew him. She had known him before the door finished swinging. Gabriel, Duke of Severncote, was reading her eulogy. She believed. The Duke read, and his voice was low and carried to the stone, and said at once, laughing, as though it were a small thing, that no one in England would cross a room for her. I have thought about that sentence every day since the sea took her. I crossed counties too late. Honoria did not cry out. She did not faint. She did not fall. She had crossed the Bay of Biscay twice, once on a ship and once in the water, and somewhere between the two had lost the trick of fainting. She drew her hood forward, stepped into the shadow of the font, and lowered herself into the back pew beside an old woman who never turned. Her heart went 1, 2, 3, 4, like a fist on a door. She had come home expecting cold mutton and her uncle's particular smile that never reached his eyes. She had walked into her own funeral instead. I am told a eulogy should praise, the Duke read on. Very well. I will praise. She kept the accounts of a house that never thanked her. She taught her cousin music and sat in the dark of the room while the girl was applauded by candlelight. She planted rosemary at her father's grave with a kitchen trowel and told nobody, and it grows there still, the only green thing in that row with any courage in winter. Most of what I owe her I never paid. This is the last coin I have, and I am spending it before witnesses. A woman sobbed into a black glove. A man cleared his throat as men do when they will not weep. And at the back, under a hood, the dead woman sat with her scarred hands folded, listening to the only declaration of love she had ever received, delivered over lilies and rosemary to a portrait of her at 19. She thought, quite clearly, the whole world believes it. There is a stone out there with my name on it, and he is speaking as though he loved me. And then, because she had never been given anything she was not first made to prove, she thought, my uncle sits in the front pew, in new black. I have been dead 8 months, and my portion has died with me. Hold that picture, the bright church, the flowers, the man at the lectern spending his last coin, the drowned woman at the back, with the road still on her boots. Nothing here happened by chance. To understand how a living woman comes to the rear of her own memorial, the story goes back 6 years, to the winter they buried her father, and the summer a duke loved the wrong niece and never said one word aloud. Edmund Fell died in the January of 1810, of a fever caught riding home wet from a sick tenant's cottage, the sort of death, his neighbors agreed, he would have chosen had deaths been offered round like dishes. He left a leasehold house, called Ashcombe, a daughter of 19, and £3,000 in the funds, held in trust for her until she should marry or turn 25. The trust he gave to his younger brother Roderick, because a dying man believes the best of his blood, and because Roderick had the finest mourning manners in the county. "She shall be as my own daughter," Roderick said at the graveside, with his hand on Honoria's shoulder, weighing it down like a wet coat. "As my own." He was heard by 30 people, and he meant it, to be heard. That was the winter Honoria learned that some sentences are made for the hearers, not the person they are spoken to. She stood straight under the hand and said nothing, and watched them lower her whole world into the frozen ground, and when the mourners were gone, she walked back through the snow with a slip of her mother's rosemary and a trowel, and planted it at the grave's head, and notched the yew behind so she would always know the spot when grass grew over the curb. "For remembrance," she said to the cold air. Nobody heard that sentence at all. It was the only one that winter that was entirely true. Ashcombe passed into her uncle's keeping along with the trust, for a house must be lived in and a girl kept somewhere, and Roderick moved his family in before Lady Day, Aunt Maud, who suffered headaches the size of parishes and required a household arranged about them, and the daughter Cecily, 16 that spring, golden ringleted, with a laugh like a dropped tea tray. Pretty in the fashion that makes a room forgive everything else. Honoria was given the small north bedroom, the one over the scullery, and it was explained to her that this was a kindness. "Grief wants quiet, my love," said Aunt Maud, pressing her hand, "and the north room is so very quiet." "Thank you, Aunt," said Honoria, "and you will keep the household books, of course. It will occupy the mind." "There is nothing so dangerous for a young woman in your position as an unoccupied mind." "My position," said Honoria. "Orphaned," said her aunt gently, as though correcting her spelling. "Dependent. We none of us choose our positions, dear. We only fill them gracefully." So she filled it, 5 years gracefully, kept the books, mended what the maids could not, nursed the headaches, taught Cecily music until the girl could play 3 pieces brilliantly and nothing else. "Why must there be scales?" Cecily would groan, sliding off the stool. "Nobody claps for scales, Nori. Nobody ever once clapped for a scale." "Nobody claps for the mortar in a wall either," said Honoria. "You will notice, however, that the wall stands. You say such odd things." Cecily looked at her cousin then with genuine, uncruel puzzlement, which was somehow worse than cruelty. "You might be almost pretty if you said fewer of them, and wore colors. Why do you always wear gray?" Honoria looked down at her dove gray morning dress, twice turned, mended at the cuff with thread a shade too dark, and smiled the small smile she had learned to keep where a temper would have been. "Gray is serviceable," she said. "It goes with everything, chiefly with being overlooked, which is the color I am most often asked to wear." She was 24 when the 6th summer came, the high blue summer of 1815, when the old Duke of Severncote at last drank himself into the family vault, and his son came down from London to take up the title, the house, and the debts of Severncote Court. The new Duke was 31, fair, and given to arriving everywhere too fast. Within a fortnight 3 matrons had claimed him for their daughters, and Aunt Maud, whose headaches lifted with remarkable speed that July, had claimed him for Cecily. He looked at her twice in church, she announced at dinner. Twice, Mr. fell, the second time during the psalm. "He looked at the window behind her," said Honoria, without malice, because it was simply true. The light was coming through it. "He looked," said Aunt Maud twice. Uncle Roderick said little, but had the carriage repainted, and spoke of Cecily's prospects in the voice other men kept for consuls. When the dinner invitation came from Severncote Court, he read it aloud at breakfast twice, his eyes with a shine Honoria did not entirely like. The books had taught her things by then, sums that arrived and left like uneasy ghosts, repairs paid for twice, a London tailor's bill in a year her uncle had bought no coats that she had seen. She did not yet know a trust can be eaten quietly from the inside, like a beam with worm in it, and that the eating was years advanced. She only knew that when she once asked, meekly enough, whether the interest on her portion accumulated as her father intended, Roderick set down his knife, looked at her a long moment, and said, in a voice like a door being locked, "Your father appointed me your trustee, Honoria, not you mine. I hope that distinction is not too fine for a clever girl to grasp." "No, uncle," she said. "It is not too fine. You are fed, roofed, and clothed." "I am, uncle. Then we shall consider the accounts audited." He smiled at his own wit, and Aunt Maud laughed, and Cecily, who was rereading the Severncote invitation for the 10th time, looked up and said, "What are we laughing at?" And the matter of the £3,000 went back to sleep for another year. So the household drove up the valley one evening in late July, Cecily in new pink muslin, Aunt Maud in feathers, and in the corner, in gray, Honoria, brought along only because leaving her home would have looked worse than bringing her, carrying nothing into that candle-lit house but a straight back and hands that smelled of rosemary. She expected nothing but a long table and a stiff neck. She was wrong about the evening and about the whole summer. Cecily played her 3 brilliant pieces and was applauded by candlelight, and Aunt Maud began reupholstering the drawing room in her mind. Honoria turned the pages, and afterwards, when the party had drifted to cards and the terrace doors stood open for the heat, she slipped out to the garden. Because gardens do not require one to smile. He found her by the herb border. She heard boots on gravel behind her, unhurried. Then they stopped, and a voice said, "That is rosemary, madam. I am reliably informed by my gardener that everything in this bed is rosemary. He plants it, I believe, out of spite, because my father once ordered it all pulled up for roses." "Then your gardener is a man of principle, your grace," said Honoria, and turned and made her curtsy. "Rosemary is for remembrance. Roses are only for looking at." "You are the elder Miss Fell," said the Duke, "the one who turned the pages." "I am the one who turned the pages." "You turned one of them early." His mouth almost smiled. The slow movement. 4 bars early, and your cousin sailed clean over the gap and never knew it was there. I have been wondering all evening whether it was an accident. Honoria looked at him a moment. He was tall against the lit windows, watching her with a directness nobody had pointed at her in 5 years, and she made the only reckless decision of her quiet life, which was to tell a duke the truth. Her page was buttered, she said, at dinner. It was stuck to the next. It was either turn early or let the sonata die in front of company, and my cousin does not deserve that, whatever she does to sonatas. There was a silence of perhaps 3 seconds, and Honoria counted every one and learned much later that the Duke had counted them too, and that a man may feel the ground shift under a sentence about butter. The Duke laughed, a short real laugh startled out of him like a bird from a hedge, and afterwards regarded her as men regard a locked room that has unexpectedly answered a knock. "No," he said, "she does not deserve that. Walk with me as far as the fountain, Miss Fell, and tell me what else in my house is buttered. I have been away 11 years, and I find I do not know one honest thing about it. It was the beginning, and everything after grew out of it green and quiet. They met all that summer, the accidental way, which is to say constantly, at the lending library, where he claimed to read Voyages until 3 of her questions killed the pretence, at the church, where a duke took to arriving early, to Mr. Beach's bewilderment, because she came early to dress her father's grave. Over the wall he learned the small map of her, the rosemary, the notch in the U, a mother now only a scent of linen, and a bush by the kitchen door. "You notched the tree," he said, leaning on the wall, in riding dress, the reins loose in one glove. "Why? There is a headstone. Grass grows over curbs, and moss over letters. Stone is for the parish." She firmed the earth around the plant with her bare hand. "The notch is for me. If I am ever old and foolish and cannot find him, the U will know the spot. And if someone should fell the U, then I hope I shall have someone to walk out with me who remembers where it stood," she said, simply, not looking at him, meaning nothing by it, and the Duke looked down at the top of her gray bonnet with the expression of a man handed his own sentence and told to read it aloud, and did not say one word. He had budgeted for prudence that summer, having inherited a ruin of debts and a county of hopeful mothers, and sworn to do nothing rash until his house stood on its legs. He had not budgeted for Honoria. One wet afternoon, he spread his estate maps on the library table and, for reasons he did not examine, asked her opinion, and she gave it him. "Your steward drains the wrong field first," she said, one finger on the low meadow. "The water only comes back up the lane. My steward has had the managing of this land 30 years. Then he has been wrong for 30 of them, your grace, which is not the same thing as right for one. My father tried that very order. We lost the barley twice before he would own it. And you would drain the high ground first. I would drain the high ground first, cut the leat along here, and let the meadow take the overflow it was built to take. But I am a woman in a turned gray gown telling a duke his business, so no doubt I have it backwards." "No," he looked from the map to her face and back again. "No, you have it exactly right. That is the difficulty with you, Miss Fell. You are never mistaken about anything, save your own worth." He had said it before he weighed it, and it was Honoria who bent again to the map. Because a woman 5 years overlooked does not know what to do with her hands when she is seen. He did not touch her. All that summer, the county watching Cecily's ringlets, he did not once touch her, and the not touching became the loudest thing in his life. Once, at the August fair, the crowd surged, and she was pushed, and his hand came up and closed on her wrist, hard, 1 heartbeat, 2. And she looked up, and the fair went far away, and he saw she was 5 years starved of being held onto and let go as though the wrist had burned him. For a man who cannot yet speak has no business holding on. "Forgive me," he said. "For what, your grace?" said Honoria, whose pulse was going like a rabbit, and who would have died in the pens before showing it. For nothing, he thought. For everything. For the crowd, he said, and they spoke of sheep. She did not let herself hope. That was the thing everyone got wrong afterwards. She knew what she was, and dukes married consuls and connections. This summer-long conversation she catalogued as friendship, the one luxury of her grown life. When Cecily chattered of his grace at dinner, Honoria turned the pages of her own heart in silence. A trick 5 years had taught her. She only slipped once. In September, on the morning he told her, over the churchyard wall, awkward for once, that he must go up to London on business of the estate and would be gone some weeks, she looked at the rosemary and nodded him and said, before she could stop herself, "The parish will be very flat Your Grace. I find I have grown used to being contradicted. Miss Fell, said the Duke, and stopped. The horse shifted. Somewhere down the lane a wood pigeon went on and on about nothing. When I come back, he said at last, there is a conversation I mean to have. I am not free to have it yet. I ask you to believe that the delay is arithmetic and not indifference. I am very fond of arithmetic, she said, to the Rosemary. I know, he said. It is one of the reasons. And he had ridden half a mile before she understood he had not finished the sentence, and had meant her to finish it herself, and she stood in the churchyard, her heart going like the Fair Day crowd, and thought for one whole minute that her life was about to begin. He was gone 3 weeks, and what he did in London no one in the parish knew for 8 months. He found his debts survivable, sold a snuff-box collection his father had loved better than any living person, and wrote 2 letters in his own hand. The first, to Roderick Fell of Ashcombe, asked leave to pay his addresses to Mr. Fell's niece. The second he sealed apart, the Severn coat arms deep in black wax, superscribed to Miss Honoria Fell herself. He wrote it at 1 a.m. at a standing desk in Albemarle Street, and dated it the 29th of September, 1815. Keep that date. The whole story turns on it, as a door turns on one hinge. Both letters came down together to the bookroom on the 3rd of October. On the silver tray, while Honoria was out cutting the last of the rosemary. That was all the distance her life missed her by: a hallway, a tray, and a locked door. Roderick read the first twice, then sat a long time with the sealed one, turning it in the candlelight, the wax catching the flame like a small black eye opening and closing, and a man's whole judgment day arriving early. Here is what her uncle knew that October, and no one else did. Of the £3,000 in trust for his niece there remained under 900. The rest had gone over 5 years into the carriage and the tailor and 2 seasons of canal shares that drowned faster than any packet ship. While she stayed a dependent spinster, the theft was invisible, for a trustee reports to none but the ward. But a betrothal changed the arithmetic. A duke's lawyers would call for the accounts and find the whole in a week, and the word for a trustee who empties his ward's fund does not stop at disgrace. It travels all the road to the assizes. He could not make the money whole, and could not refuse a duke and expect the matter to rest. Suitors of that rank do not go quietly, they inquire. He sat late over the japanned box, and it was Maud, come down for her drops, who found him grey at the desk. Roderick, it is past 2. What ails you? Severncote means to marry Honoria. Honoria? Maud sat down without being asked, which she never did. Our Honoria? The one in grey? He has written me for leave to address her. His men of business will draw the settlements. And settlements, Maud, require the trust accounts laid open on a table before a duke's own lawyers. His wife knew a locked door when she walked into one. How much is gone? She whispered. All but 900. And she is 25 next spring, when the whole of it must be shown. Then make it good. Sell the carriage. Sell my mother's plate. The plate would not cover the interest. There is no making it good in the months I have. There is only making her gone. He turned the sealed letter over, and the wax caught the candle. There is a widow at Lisbon wants an English companion. Respectable. Remote. If the girl sails before he calls again, betrothed to nobody, of her own apparent choosing, then the Duke is answered. The audit never falls. And no attorney is ever sent to open one ledger in this house. She will never go so far from home. Not willing. She will go willing, said Roderick Fell, if she is given the right reason to think herself unwanted here. And that, at least, this family has always known how to provide. Maud looked at him a long while, then looked away, took her drops, and went up, and asked nothing more. And that was her share in it, carried to her own grave. It was done within the week. Through a Bristol agency paid in coin, the situation was fixed, and on a wet October morning he summoned Honoria to the bookroom, where the fire was lit and his face arranged into sorrowful kindness, and the 2 letters lay locked in the 3rd drawer not 4 feet from her hand. "You are 24, Honoria," he said gently. "I will be plain with you, as your poor father would have wished. Your portion is small. Your prospects here are, we must be honest, none, Mrs. Maud's health sinks. Cecily's season will empty this house of comfort and of every spare shilling. And you cannot wish, I know you are too proud to wish, to be the unwed niece in the attic at 40, mending sheets in a house that pities her." She stood very still, in gray, and something in her chest went down a stair it did not know was there. "I had not thought myself only pitied here, uncle." "You are loved here," he said smoothly, which was the practiced sentence, made for hearers, though the room held none, "which is why I have exerted myself. A situation is secured for you, a genteel one, a warm climate, an amiable family, £40 a year, and your own maintenance. Lisbon, my dear. The packet sails from Falmouth on the 9th of November. Lisbon." She heard the word arrive from a long distance. "Uncle, that is not a visit. That is an emigration. It is an independence." He let the fire crackle a moment. "It is more than most women in your position are ever offered." "And if I should refuse it?" she asked, very quietly. He had not looked for the question, and it showed for half a breath before the sorrow came down again over his face like a drawn blind. "Refuse it? My dear, you are 21 and without a shilling that I have not provided. Where would you go? And to whom? There is no refusing a kindness, Honoria. There is only taking it gracefully or ungracefully. And I had thought better of your sense than the second. You had thought better of my sense," she repeated, and heard, under her own level voice, the small click of a key she could not yet see. "I have your interest at heart, as your poor father charged me," he said, and turned the ring on his finger, which he did when he lied, though she did not know that yet. She was given 3 days, and spent them walking the lanes in the rain like a woman trying to outwalk a verdict. On the 2nd evening, hating herself for it, she asked her question at dinner, eyes on her plate. "Is there any news of Severncote, Aunt? The parish seems very quiet without his comings and goings." "Severncote?" Aunt Maud's fork paused above her plate. "Why should there be news of a duke at this table, child?" "No reason. Only that his grace was used to call, and does not." It was her uncle who answered, unhurried, buttering his bread. "He is detained in town, I understand. Cecily, my love, did you not have something of it from Mrs. Prouting?" Cecily, who had heard no such thing but could never bear to sit outside a piece of knowledge, tossed her ringlets. "Oh, everybody has it. He is to be married. An heiress of the Coutts connection, £40,000 and a house in Grosvenor Square. They say the banns are as good as Reed." "Married," said Honoria. The word came out level. She had had 5 years' practice at level. "You sound surprised." Her uncle raised his eyes to her at last, mild as new milk. "Surely you did not suppose a man of that rank lingered in a country parish for its own sake. Great men are civil to everyone, and mean it towards no one, Honoria. It is well to learn that young, and cheaply. A companion's post in a warm climate will teach you the wider world, where such lessons come dearer." He returned to his bread. "Why do you ask, my dear?" "No reason," said Honoria Fell, and the last small light in her went out with no more noise than a snuffed candle, and on the third day she said yes to Lisbon. Had she wept, had she named him, had she once said aloud what the churchyard wall knew, the lie would have had to fight for its life. But she had spent 5 years learning to want nothing visibly, and the training held all the road to Falmouth. It very nearly held forever. On the morning she left, her uncle handed her, with grave ceremony, a flat packet wrapped in oiled skin, sealed with his own seal, addressed to the merchant at Lisbon. "Your papers," he said. "Your baptismal record, your father's letters, the memorandum of your portion. Such documents as a young woman abroad must be able to show. I have enclosed them under my seal to Mr. Gurney, with my letter of introduction. Keep it dry, keep it whole, and give it into his own hand." Yes, uncle, he had made the packet up himself, sweeping her documents from the third drawer into the oilskin by candlelight. In haste, Aunt Maud calling from the stairs about trunks. Under her baptismal record lay the 2 September letters, kept not from sentiment, but because a guilty man can never decide whether evidence is safer burned or kept. And when he pressed his seal to the oilskin, Roderick did not know, and would not for 8 months, that he had sealed the Duke's own unopened letter, arms and date and all, into his niece's luggage with his own hands. The Speedwell packet left Falmouth on the 9th of November with a fair wind, 26 souls aboard, and Miss Honoria fell at the rail in grey, watching England go down into the sea like something being put away in a drawer. 4 nights out, in the Bay of Biscay, the wind rose to a gale, and a little after 2 in the morning, the Speedwell lost her foremast, broached, and struck a lee shore no one saw until it stood white under the bow. Honoria remembered it after only in pieces, the deck standing up like a ploughed hillside, a grey-bearded sailor lashing her to a spar and roaring the words "hold" and "morning." She held. The sea took the ship and 1 in 20 of the 6 and 20 souls, and drove her half-drowned into the slack water inside a headland, where fishermen found her at first light with sand in her hair, 3 ribs cracked, and the oilskin packet still knotted inside her stays. The fever did not loose her until February. The shipping lists reached England before Christmas, the Speedwell lost with all hands. The living truth lay scattered among 5 fishing villages that wrote no English, but the lists took 3 weeks. And the lists said drowned. At Ashcombe, her uncle read the notice at breakfast, twice, and set it down with a steady hand. He wore black within the week, buried an empty coffin beside her father, and in the spring, as heir at law of a niece dead intestate, took what remained of her portion, which paid the most pressing of the debts that portion had made. The account, as he understood accounts, was closed. At Severncote Court a duke stood in his hall with a 3-week-old paper, and made no sound at all, only walked out bareheaded into the sleet, and did not come back until dark. He had been told she sailed betrothed to a Lisbon gentleman. He took it standing, like a ball in the shoulder, and told no one. He went silent, and became what the county called steady and his servants called stone, and only Mr. Beach saw him ride at odd hours to a grave with no body under it, beside a notched yew, above a rosemary bush that had no business surviving that winter, and survived. One raw afternoon Mr. Beach found him there, hat in hand, and did not go away. "You will take a chill, your grace, standing so. I am told she lies here." "She does, sir, or the parish believes so." The old man hesitated. "You knew Miss Fell?" "One summer. I meant to marry her, Beach. I had it all drawn. I was answered that she was promised elsewhere and gone abroad." "Promised, mister? Beach looked at the rosemary, and something moved in his plain good face. She dressed this grave every Sunday of her life, sir, and wanted no man that I ever saw, save perhaps the one who would not come to the point. It is not my place, but I never once believed she sailed to Lisbon glad. Nor, God forgive me, the Duke said at last, did I let myself ask why she sailed at all. And he left a coin in the poor box that would have bought the whole churchyard, and rode home in the dark, and asked no one anything, because the dead give nothing back. So did she. Drowning is tidy, survival is not. She woke in a loft that smelled of salt fish, her hair cropped to the skull, and paid her way with a needle and 10 words of Spanish. She wrote home once, in March, 4 lines begging passage money, and waited on the answer into May, and none ever came. Even then she told herself only that the posts were at war with the world. Some minds must be shown their monsters, and hers would be, presently, in a church. In June a brig out of Bilbao took her north for her needlework, and on the 8th of July she came ashore at Bristol with 3 shillings in the packet, and did not write ahead. Because something in her wanted to see the truth of the faces before they arranged themselves. She got her wish. God help her, she got it whole. The coach put her down at Marleyford at 10 that Sunday, the 12th of July, 1816. She walked the 11 miles, for 3 shillings hire no horses, and came over the last stile into Nethercombe afternoon, footsore and salt-stained, and saw the churchyard full of empty carriages, and heard the church full of silence, and thought, a funeral, and an old habit of service took her to the door to slip in at the back and mourn whoever the parish had lost. Now the story stands again where it began, and every face has a name. The bright church, 200 mourners, her uncle in the foremost pew in new black, her portrait in the noon shaft among lilies and rosemary, and at the lectern, the man who had said the delay was arithmetic and come home to a newspaper, spending his last coin before witnesses. In the pew ahead, 2 matrons had their heads together, their whispers reaching her in the pauses like water finding cracks. A full year's mind, and a duke to read it. Depend upon it, there was something there, whatever the family says. There was nothing there, Mrs. Prouting. He never so much as stood up with her at the assemblies. Then why is he at that lectern, ma'am, looking like his own effigy? Men do not read eulogies over nothing. Men do not pay for stones over nothing, either, and my brother had it from the mason himself who settled that account, and it was not Roderick Fell. Hush, her poor uncle. Look at him, he is quite bowed. I am looking at him, said Mrs. Prouting, in a voice that had buried 3 husbands and audited every grief in the parish for 40 years. I have been looking at him since January, and I will tell you what I see, ma'am. I see a man who wears mourning the way other men wear their Sunday best. Now hush yourself. The Duke is turning the page. The Duke turned the page, and the dead woman at the back, who had come in expecting a stranger's funeral and found her own portrait in the flowers, sat with her cracked hands gripped together and listened to him read. I must say now what I have no right to say, he read, and for the first time his voice lost its level. The family will forgive me, or they will not. Miss Fell was told all her life, in 1,000 wordless ways, that she was the lesser of her house, that she was plain where plain meant unregarded, and clever where clever meant inconvenient. She was told it so well that she believed it, and she carried the belief so gracefully that the parish mistook it for contentment. I knew her one summer. And I tell this congregation that the lesser of that house was the best thing in this county, and I stood at a wall and let arithmetic argue me out of saying so while there was time. I told myself there would be a better hour, a solvent hour, an hour when I might offer her a whole house and not a mortgaged one. I have learned since that there is no such hour, and that the only thing a man truly owns to give is the plain word said in time. I did not say it. I trusted it to a letter, and a letter is a coward's proxy, and mine did not even arrive. She thought no one in England would cross a room for her. Very well. She is owed a crossing. When this office is done, I will walk from this lectern to that portrait before all of these witnesses. And I will make my apology where her name is, since I cannot make it where she is, and every soul present may draw from that exactly the conclusion they please. I loved her. There, it is said, 8 months too late. In the wrong tense, in front of her own, he looked up. A latch had clicked, the outer door falling to behind a draught, and the lifted eye went down the bright aisle. Over 200 bowed heads, to the shadow by the font, where a travel-stained figure had risen, meaning to slip out before her heart broke, the hood fallen back from her cropped hair, the noon light full on her face. The silence that followed lasted, by the rector's count, 4 seconds. In it a page of the eulogy slid from the Duke's hand and seesawed to the lectern, loud as a shudder in the stillness. "Honoria," said the Duke. Not a question, not a cry, just the name, laid down flat like a last card turned face up, and 200 heads came round in one rustle of crepe, and Aunt Maud's scream arrived a second later. The drowned woman stood in the aisle in the plain noon light, alive as a Tuesday morning. And the Duke came down from the lectern without seeming to know he had moved, and his face, Mrs. Prouting told everyone after, was not the face of a man seeing a ghost. It was the face of a man let out of somewhere. It was her uncle who broke the spell, and he broke it magnificently. He was on his feet while the parish was still gaping, and his voice rang with exactly the right blend of anguish and authority, the voice of a bereaved man defending his dead. "Stand where you are." He flung out an arm at her down the aisle. "In the name of decency, woman, whoever set thee on, stand where thou art." Oh, this is vile. This is the vilest thing I have known in 50 years of life. Mr. Beach, Sir Humphrey, I appeal to the whole congregation, look at this creature. We bury our girl in January, and in July, to the very service of her year's mind, comes a brown, cropped, ragged stranger got up in a traveling cloak to walk in upon our grief and be my niece. Look at her. Look at her hands like a boatman's. Look at that shorn head. Is that Honoria Fell of Ashcombe? Is it, or is it what follows the newspapers to every drowned fortune in England, sirs, a resurrection woman, an impostor coached in some port ale house to weep on cue and split an estate with her keepers? You are very quick, Mr. Fell. The Duke's quiet voice cut across the uncle's clean as a blade. A stranger walks in, and before one soul has asked her name you have tried her, convicted her, and christened her crime. A grieving man gropes for hope, sir. He does not reach first for the word impostor. I guard my dead niece's memory, your grace, from a ghoul. Then you can have no objection to letting the ghoul speak. The dead cannot be slandered, Misty, Fell. Only the living can. I begin to wonder which of the two it is you fear. And the terrible thing is that it half worked, because it was half true. She was brown. She was cropped. The sea and the fever had remade her, and the parish had had its Honoria pale and gray gowned, and never looked at her closely in its life. She saw doubt travel the pews like a draught through corn. She saw Cecily, white as the lilies, whisper, "It is her, Papa. Surely it is her voice," and saw her uncle press the girl's arm down without a glance, the practiced motion of a man muffling a bell. Sir Humphrey Dodd, The magistrate rose heavily from the third pew, a fair man, a slow man, and 60, who had signed the administration of her estate himself and disliked every part of what the morning had become. "Sir, your grief is respected," he said. "But charges are charges, and churches are churches. Young woman, thou dost hear what is alleged. Hast thou anything to say?" "A great deal, Sir Humphrey," said Honoria Fell, and at the sound of her voice, level, dry, unhurried, half the parish leaned forward at once. "But I would rather show than say. My uncle asks the congregation to look at my hands, and the congregation should do so. They are a working woman's hands. He is right. The sea does not return what it takes in the same wrapper, sir. I make no complaint of that. Only I notice that in all his grief, my uncle has stood a full minute pointing at my hands and my hair, and has not once looked at my eyes. Fathers of families in the pews there, if thy drowned daughter stood up alive in the aisle on a Sunday noon, which would thou look at first, her haircut or her face?" There was a low sound down the nave, not laughter. Church would not permit it, but its shadow. "I will not bandy with it," said Roderick, magnificent still, though a fine dew had come to his upper lip. "Sir Humphrey, I demand the creature be taken up. There is law for this." "There is," said Honoria, "and I ask for it. All of it, uncle. Thou shalt have constables, magistrates, judges, as many as thou canst bear. But we are all here, 200 witnesses and God besides, and the proofs I carry will not take 10 minutes. Deny me those minutes in this church, sir, and every soul present will spend the rest of the year wondering why." Sir Humphrey looked at the Duke, who had stopped, by force of some discipline, 3 paces from her, and had not once taken his eyes from her face, and who now said, quietly, in a voice like a held rein, "The parish has the morning, Sir Humphrey. I find I am not needed at the lectern. It appears I was misinformed as to the deceased." "Proceed then," said Sir Humphrey. "But mark, woman, I knew Miss Fell. A magistrate signs nothing lightly. Convince me." "Then, sir, begin at the window." She turned and pointed west, through the clear glass to the churchyard bright with noon. "Thou canst see my father's grave from where thou standest. Edmund Fell, 3rd in the row from the wall. At its head grows a rosemary bush. Ask the parish who planted it. No one will answer, because no one knows. It was planted the evening of his funeral, in the snow, by his daughter, alone, with the kitchen trowel from Ashcombe, a slip of her dead mother's bush wrapped in wet linen. And because a grave loses its edges in 20 years, and a daughter thinks of such things, she cut a mark with that trowel into the yew behind, at the height of her own collarbone, 1 notch, angled down. Send the sexton, sir. If the notch is not there, take me up for a cheat this hour." Old Winnow the sexton was gone before the magistrate finished nodding, and came back through the south door with his hat off and his face working. "It be there, Sir Humphrey," he said. 1 notch, slantwise, growed grey with the years, just where she saith. And, sirs, I'll say more. I've kept that yard man and boy, and I never knowed who set that bush, and it hath troubled me 20 year. For someone weeds about it he stopped, and turned to her. "Someone weeded about it every Sunday, sirs," he said, "until this last November. And then, no one did. The silence had weight now, and it was leaning." "Servant's knowledge," said Roderick, but the magnificence had stumbled. "Tales below stairs. Any listening kitchen girl these 20 years, then here is what no kitchen ever heard," said Honoria. "On that table, among my relics, I see the family has laid out the Fell christening veil. Brussels lace, 5 generations. Mr. Beach, would thou lift it, and unfold it to the 3rd fold? In the third fold there is a tear, 2 inches, mended. The mend is fine, but the thread is a half shade too blue, because it was matched by candlelight in a hurry, in the winter of 1812, by a woman sworn to secrecy, for the tear was made by me, and my aunt would have been very hard on it, and on her. I did not mend it. I have not the fineness with lace. I carried it, crying, at 15 years old at night, to the one needle in this parish I trusted, and I have kept her secret to this hour, as she has kept mine. Mr. Beach unfolded the lace with hands that shook and carried it into the noon shaft beside the portrait. There is a mend, he said slowly. In the third fold. The thread is, yes, too blue, and in the 5th pew a small round woman in a decent bonnet stood up as though hoisted, pressed both hands to her mouth, took them away, and said, to the whole of Nethercombe Church, I mended that tear. Winnow's wife, sirs, I mended it. The 2nd winter of the war it was, and I told no living soul, not even him, and no living soul knew of it save me and one other, and the other stands there. And God forgive me for a fool, that is Miss Honoria, that is our young lady, whatever they have done to her hair, and I will swear it on the book this minute. And Mrs. Winnow burst into tears, and pushed her husband's arm away, and kept standing. Roderick Fell tried once more, and his voice had thinned to a wire. A trowel, a bush, a servant's needlework. Sir Humphrey, these are the county's own gossip turned back upon us. I will not stand in God's house and be robbed by a beggar's memory. Then be robbed by your own hand, said Honoria, and there was no triumph in it, only a great tiredness, and it carried further than any shout. From beneath her shawl she drew out the flat oilskin packet, sea-bleached, its tarred string still double-knotted. And she held it up until the noon shaft found it and made it shine. I sailed with this against my heart, and I came through the wreck with it, because my uncle bade me guard it and deliver it to a merchant at Lisbon, and I am a woman who keeps her word. I have never broken this seal. It is his. Sir Humphrey, thou art a magistrate. Cut it thyself, and read the parish what a guardian packed into his niece's baggage the night before he shipped her to her grave. Sir Humphrey came down the aisle, took the packet, and cut the string with his own knife, while the church held its breath. Inside lay a baptismal record, 4 unpaid tradesmen's bills made out to Roderick Fell, and a sheet of accounts in that same hand, canal shares totted against a fund marked plain, H. Fell, in trust, and one thing more, which the magistrate lifted last and held to the light, a letter, thick, unopened, sealed with black wax in the shape of a coronet, superscribed to Miss Honoria Fell, dated the 29th of September, 1815. Sir Humphrey held it up so the church could see the black seal. A letter, unopened, addressed to my niece, in a hand I do not know. Mr. Fell, do you own this? I have never set eyes on it, said Roderick, too fast by half. It came out of the packet you sealed with your own seal, said Honoria, quite gently, into my baggage, the night before you sent me to sea. I never opened it. I did not know it was there. A trick. She has salted the thing herself, aboard some smack in some port, with a seal she cannot counterfeit, said Sir Humphrey. And a hand she says she has never seen? Peace, sir, he turned. Your Grace, you have gone the colour of the wall. Do you know this seal? At the lectern the Duke made a sound as if he had been struck. I know it, he said. It is mine. It is my hand, and my arms in the wax, and my letter. I wrote it at a standing desk in Albemarle Street, and gave it into a trusted post, addressed to this lady. And I had it answered by her guardian that she was already promised to a gentleman of the Lisbon trade, and had sailed to be married. She swears it never reached her. And here it lies unbroken, dated before ever she sailed, carried across an ocean by the one soul alive who never once broke the seal. There is a single house it can have passed through, Sir Humphrey. To end sealed in her baggage and never in her hand. Ask him whose letters cross his own breakfast table first and are opened there. The magistrate broke the coronet wax, and he read it aloud. Every word, the settlement, the request for leave, and the one plain line near the end, I have loved your niece since a rainy afternoon in June, and I have been too careful and too slow. And I will be slow no longer. And long before he finished, Roderick Fell had sat down in the front pew, with the boneless suddenness of a coat slipping from a hook, his face in his hands, while the parish watched the true account of her settle, at last on the man who had closed the books. Sir Humphrey turned the folded sheet of figures to the light. And this is your own hand, Mr. Fell, canal shares, and set against them a fund entered here as H. Fell, in trust. £3,000 your brother left this lady. How much of it stands to her name this morning? The silence stretched until it ached. Answer him, uncle, said Honoria, without heat. Under 900, Roderick said at last, to his own knees. There is under 900. So you buried a living niece to cover a hole you had dug in her purse, said Sir Humphrey heavily, and let a duke pay for the stone, and wore her mourning through a parish that wept beside you. I granted you her estate with my own hand, sir. I shall revoke it before I sleep, and there will be an accounting of every shilling at the quarter sessions. You cannot prove intent, Roderick tried, from very far down. A bad investment is not a crime. Grief muddled me. Any man might have written to Santander when a servant swore she had seen the girl's own hand begging passage, said Honoria. You had my letter, uncle. You had it in March. You chose the coffin over the fair. And at that Roderick Fell said nothing at all, because there was nothing left in the drawer to say. He was not struck down, nor cursed, nor dragged out. Honoria would not have had it so. She only looked at her uncle a long moment. I asked you once if any letter had come for me. I have my answer now. Keep the money, uncle. I came home for something you never had the keeping of. And she turned from him, which was the whole of her revenge, and heavier than any blow. He rose by himself, an old man where a stout one had sat down, and went up the aisle alone through the parish that had thought him good, and no soul reached to stop him, and none to strike him, which was the heaviest verdict the morning had to give. Then the Duke of Severncote crossed the church. He came down from the chancel and passed the lilies and the portrait of a girl at 19, and did not stop at the portrait, because he no longer needed it, and came the length of the bright aisle to the shorn, sunburnt, living woman at the font, before every soul who had ever failed to see her. He stopped close enough that she had to lift her chin, and took the fallen page of his eulogy from his coat and let it drop. Everything I said of her is true, he said, so that the stone carried it to the back, save one word. I read it in the wrong tense before witnesses, and I will mend it before the same witnesses, not was. He took her scarred hand in both his gloved ones at last, and held on. Is. You crossed the room, said Honoria Fell, whose eyes were bright at last and unashamed. I crossed a churchful, he said. I would have crossed the sea, had anyone told me it kept you. Marry me, Honoria, not to right a wrong, not before a magistrate. Because I chose you at a lit window over a jest about butter, and I have chosen nothing since, and I am done being a careful man. Then choose out loud, she said, for I have been a great while overlooked. I choose her, said the Duke of Severncote, to the parish of Nethercombe, publicly, legally, and without one word of apology to anyone but her. And he kissed her hand, And then, because he was done with arithmetic, her mouth and the church of her funeral broke into the one sound no funeral ever hears, which was cheering. The banns were read in that same church a month later, on a high blue Sunday, by Mr. Beach, whose voice shook only a little. The women of Nethercombe filled the sills with white roses and hedgerow green, and turned the stand that had held a portrait into a bower for a bride. And in the bride's hands, among the white, tucked where only she and the man waiting for her would know to look, was a single gray-green sprig cut that morning from a bush at a grave's head, the one green thing in that row with any courage in it, still weeded every Sunday, and no longer in secret. Roderick Fell was gone from the county by then, to a cousin in a colder place, and Cecily, who had cried the truth aloud when it cost her to say it, danced at the wedding in a gown the new Duchess chose for her, and married a decent curate in time, and was the happier for it. If you have ever stood at the edge of your own life, certain you were the one soul in the room no one would ever rise and cross the floor to reach, then this story was set down for you, and told by candlelight so you might carry it up to bed. And tell me, before you sleep, in a line below, which of the two undid the lie in the end? For kind hearts differ, and I read every one. Was it the rosemary that gave her back her name, or the letter that never reached her? If the tale kept you company tonight, light a candle for it by subscribing. From all of us at the candlelit hearth, sleep well, be gentle with yourself in the small hours, and know that somewhere a room is warm and a door stands open. I shall keep the candles lit until the next tale.